this is Ellen, and today we're going to be talking about books on Palestine. On this list, I have all sorts of books: fiction, nonfiction, a cookbook, YA novel, graphic novel, a wide variety of things to help us understand this land, this culture, and this group of people. My challenge for myself today is to get through this video without crying. Let's see how I manage with that. All right, let's get started. Our first book today is a novel called The Inheritance by Sahar Khalifa. At this point, I am a huge fan of Sahar Khalifa. I think I've read all or most of her novels, and The Inheritance is my favorite. Inheritance tells the story of a Palestinian American woman named Zainab. She grew up in the US, and in her mid-30s, she goes to visit where her father grew up. And what she discovers there surprises her. My favorite part of the book is how funny and humorous it is. You know, there are many characters in this book. Each one is very unique and has their own agenda, and the inheritance is both talking about the inheritance of money and property, but also the cultural inheritance that you gain from the family you grew up in. This book is absolutely fantastic. I love it, and I highly recommend it, not only for the depth, but also the fun, the humor, the intricacy, the way it's written, the way it takes you through all kinds of ups and downs. Highly recommended reading. Next, I have a book it's a novel called Mornings in Jenin by Suzanne Abulhawa. And this is a powerful novel that talks about the Palestinian experience through one family, but multiple generations. So you have one family and you have multiple generations, and you have that initial uprooting and becoming refugees, and then how that affects the next generation and the one after. And it really captures that sense of resilience and hope that comes from being displaced. There is one scene in particular when that initial displacement happens. The family resides in this no man's land, and a group of them risk their life to go back to their hometown. They sneak in the middle of the night just to grab some of the fruit from the trees they used to tend to, and they bring it back to their family, and so that they would share this fruit to experience a few moments of feeling at home, that sense of belonging, that sense of being home again. It's deeply touching and very well written. So Mornings in Jenin by Suzanne Abulhawa, highly recommended reading. Next is a cookbook, and it's called Palestine on a Plate by Judy Kalla. And what I like about this book is it contains beautiful recipes, it has beautiful photography, all the things you expect from a cookbook, but also it has the stories of the author herself, what these recipes mean, how she learned them, the significance of those dishes. And so you get the recipes and the stories together, and as you're cooking these recipes and you're enjoying this food, you also are learning a little bit about the Palestinian identity and what it feels like to be living abroad and trying to explore your country through the dishes. So that is Palestine on a Plate by Judy Kalla. Next on my list is a history book. It's called Jerusalem, One City, Three Faiths by Karen Armstrong. Again, Karen Armstrong, I'm a huge fan. I think I've read the majority of what she has written, and this was the first book of hers that I've read. and I've read it while living in Jerusalem. So as I moved to Jerusalem, I ordered this book and I was reading it as I was living and as I was starting to live in the city. Um, so it starts in prehistoric times, and then it progresses into biblical times, and then it moves gradually into more modern times. And I know some people might say this book really doesn't belong in this list, but I disagree, because Jerusalem is a very important city for the Palestinians, and exploring this long history and what this city means to different people, to different faiths, to different religions. I think it's an important part of understanding of what's going on. The thing I really appreciate about this book is that it explores that concept of holiness and how it's connected to the city of Jerusalem, and how it is seen differently by different people. And it explores different perspectives uh, in a very objective manner. It is not trying to convince you of any one way of thinking. All those ways of thinking are valid. And so it allows you to expand your mind and think about things from a variety of perspectives. And I feel I've gotten an education by reading this book. It's a fairly thick and dense book. There's a lot in it. It takes a bit of a while to get through it, but I think it's well worth the effort. So that is Jerusalem, One City, Three Faiths by Karen Armstrong. Next is Against the Wall, The Art of Resistance in Palestine by William Perry. And this is a book predominantly containing pictures. There is some text, but the main focus is on the pictures, and it's pictures of graffiti that is drawn on the separation wall that is between that is separating the West Bank from Israel. And some of the artwork is by famous graffiti artists such as Banksy. Others are just by regular people, and it is absolutely fascinating. For me, discovering graffiti while visiting the occupied territories was a whole experience. I remember how overwhelmed I felt when I first went to Ramallah by all the graffiti. There's graffiti on top of graffiti on top of graffiti on any surface that's reachable by the human hand. And initially it felt quite jarring, and it felt like noise, and I didn't appreciate it. But after a while, once I adjusted to it, I realized that it's a form of expression, and it's a way to know what's on people's minds and heart. Some of the graffiti was political, some of it's religious, some of it's anti-religious, some of it's humorous, some of it's silly. And as you walk around in the city, as you're seeing all these things and the combination of it, you get a strong sense of what people are thinking and feeling. And it was that experience that several years later got me really interested in graffiti, and I wrote my novel Graffiti Hack, and it was inspired by those experiences of walking around in the city of Ramallah in the West Bank. And speaking of Ramallah, I want to draw attention to the dress I'm wearing. I bought this in Ramallah, and it's a traditional Palestinian dress. It is full of hand embroidery. Each stitch is done by hand, and I had the privilege of seeing the workshop where such dresses are made. I saw all the women sitting down, stitching each thing by hand. And let me stand up and show you. Hopefully you'll get to see. It's a really exceptional dress. And this is the type of dress that you buy, and it lasts a lifetime, and eventually you hand it down to the next generation. And I fully intend to hand this down to one of my daughters. And don't worry, I have 2 such dresses because I have 2 daughters, and each one will get one. So that was Against the Wall, the Art of Resistance in Palestine. Now next is a very special book. It's called A Little Piece of Ground by Elizabeth Laird. And it tells the story. This is a YA novel, and it tells the story of a young man, I think he's 12 or 13, who lives in the occupied territories. And despite the occupation and all the difficulties he's facing, him and his friend try to find this empty piece of land, and they try to play football there. And it's about all their adventures and how they're trying to create a sense of normalcy for themselves despite the difficult circumstances. So that is A Little Piece of Ground by Elizabeth Laird. Now, next is a graphic novel, and it's called Palestine by Joe Sacco. This is a groundbreaking work of graphic journalism. Basically, Joe Sacco actually went to Palestine, and this graphic novel is about his experiences. He documents his journey there, how he feels, what he thinks, and what he counters. And so you, the dear reader, you get to have the experience of being the outsider going to visit Palestine and seeing things through the eyes of the outsider. Joe Sacco has a very unique style of drawing. The way he draws people and situations is very unique, and it's very absorbing, and I just loved reading through it. I highly, highly recommend that you have a look at Palestine by Joe Sacco. Now, next is a book called A Child in Palestine, and these are cartoons by Naji Al-Ali, and they have been translated by Joe Sacco, which we just mentioned. Now, you have to understand how big Naji Al-Ali is, not only in Palestine, but in all of the Middle East. His cartoons are like this secret language that everybody understands. All the symbolism and the metaphors that he uses in the cartoons strongly resonate with people. And you will see elements of his cartoons on people's t-shirts, on necklaces, on a variety of objects, and everybody's familiar with it. And Naji Al-Ali at some point worked in a newspaper in Kuwait. And he published his cartoons in this newspaper called Al-Qabas. And I, as a child, was living in Kuwait, and I remember seeing those cartoons in that newspaper. And they made a very strong impression. And it's amazing how these cartoons, although they are very old, they still resonate with people today. They are still relevant today, which is amazing and incredible that it has this legacy. And so Naji Al-Ali is this huge figure in the Palestinian culture, and thanks to this book, the rest of the world can now have access to it. And this makes me very happy, and makes me very happy to be able to recommend this book to you today. Next is another huge figure in the Palestinian culture, and that is the poetry of Mahmoud Darwish. And I'm going to recommend the book called In the Presence of Absence, the poems of Mahmoud Darwish, translated by Sinan Antoun. Now, again, you have to understand how massive and important Mahmoud Darwish is. Again, this isn't something that people read because they are interested in poetry. This is poetry that people have memorized, people quote it to each other, people have it framed and hanging on their wall, people have it on their t-shirts, people write it on their things. These words really resonate with people, and many Palestinians feel that this poetry truly identifies their struggles, their hopes, and their aspirations. And it makes me super, super happy that now it's been translated to English so that the rest of the world can have access to it. In fact, I myself attempted to translate two of the poems, two poems that are my favorite. I'll put the links in the blog post associated with this video. You can see that effort, although it's amateur. I don't claim to be an expert at translating poetry, but this is how important this poetry is to people. And definitely reading it will give you that sense of what it's like to have that yearning for freedom, for live life as on your own terms, and overcome the diversity and hardships that the Palestinian people are facing today. Next is a novel called Men in the Sun. Actually, it's not a novel, it's a novella. It's relatively short, and it's called Men in the Sun by Ghassan Kanafani. Again, Ghassan Kanafani is a major figure in the Palestinian literature, and it tells the story of the plight of a group of men who are attempting to immigrate to a better life somewhere else. This book is heartbreaking, so if you read it, prepare yourself. It's not easy to read, and it's also been turned into a movie. That movie is heartbreaking as well, so prepare a box of tissue. You might need it. However, it is a very important novel. So that's Men in the Sun by Ghassan Kanafani. Now, next is a book that I've written. It's called Don't Shoot, I Have Another Story to Tell You. And this is chronicles of my experiences living in Jerusalem for 4 years and some of my experiences. It's written in a very funny and humorous way. There are some difficult and serious parts in the book as well. However, I need to warn you, this was the first book I've written. It's not very well written because I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to design book covers. I was learning all this, and so keep that in mind. Hopefully my writing style has evolved since then. However, it is what it is. If you're willing to put up with some of the shortcomings, it's a book that it's out there in the world, and you may choose to read it. Now, I saved a really, really strong recommendation towards the end, and it's a book called Sharon and My Mother-in-Law by Suad Amiri. And this is an incredibly funny book, like laugh out loud type of reading. And it's basically a story of Suad, who lives in Ramallah, and they are living her mother-in-law comes to visit her, and she's supposed to only visit her for a few weeks, but then they are placed under siege, so they're not allowed to leave. So her mother-in-law cannot leave to go back to her house, and so Suad is forced to live with her mother-in-law, and she does not get along with her mother-in-law. And Sharon in the title is a reference to Ariel Sharon, the former prime minister of Israel. And at one point, she says that she can forgive Ariel Sharon all sorts of things, all sorts of crimes. However, she can't forgive him that he made her live with her mother-in-law for a long period of time, because, this is a very negative experience for her. And you have to understand that in Arabic culture, the mother-in-law is like a whole thing. Many people have very negative things to say about their mother-in-laws. Luckily, I do not include myself in those people. I have a fantastic and lovely and very kind and very sweet mother-in-law. So I do not include myself in that. However, in Arabic culture, frequently women will talk about how monstrous their mother-in-laws are, and this book is no exception. It's super funny, and I just loved reading it. It was just hilarious. So that is Sharon and My Mother-in-Law by Saad Amiri. And next is a fantastic novel. It's called Gate of the Sun by Ilyas Khouri. Now, Ilyas Khouri is Lebanese, he's not Palestinian. However, interviewed many Palestinian refugees in Lebanon to write this book. And this novel is like this very wide, expansive novel. It has many characters and many events and spans many generations. It all starts with a patient who's in a hospital and he's comatose. And this doctor, or so-called doctor, he calls himself Dr. Khalil, comes to sit by him and starts telling him stories. He starts telling him stories of people they know, experiences they've had, and from this tapestry of stories, you are learning about the story of Palestine. It's a little bit like Arabian Nights or 1001 Nights in that it's, a whole slew of stories and all of them are connected in very unusual and interesting ways. One of the things that I think is core to this novel is there are two parallel love stories. One is a lifelong love story between two people, and this love story lasts a long time, produces many children and grandchildren, and is epic in proportions. And the second love story is short and fleeting, and on the surface of things doesn't seem to be that meaningful, although it is deeply meaningful. And the novel is really about the contrast of those two love stories and how each one has a place. One of the things I really appreciate about this novel is how critical it is. It represents both the beautiful and not so beautiful aspects of the Palestinian struggle towards freedom, and it is very objective and critical at certain points. And I appreciate the level-headedness of how it tells the story. And this novel was turned into a movie as well, and the movie is really good. I highly recommend the movie as well. So this is it. Before we end this video, you can receive a free ebook of a hand-drawn picture book that I've made. It's a picture book for grown-ups by joining my mailing list, and all the links will be available down below. You can also read written description with links of everything that I talked about in the associated blog post. Also, that link will be available with this video. And finally, I didn't want to make this video with a sense of despair. I've been thinking about making it since last year, but I didn't want to make it when I was in a certain mental state. I wanted to have a ray of light in my heart when I made it. And now is the time. I feel very hopeful. I feel very hopeful for the people of Palestine. I feel hopeful for the whole world. I feel hopeful for myself. I feel hopeful for the people of Israel. And let's hope that things work out in a fantastic and beautiful way. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you found something on this list that you will enjoy. Take care and see you around. Bye.